The last name in the hall was not chosen. It was endured. Grace Miller stood alone on the mate platform while every other woman held white flowers against her chest and wore a chosen cloak over her shoulders. Silk, silver, family colors, alpha approval. Around them, the great selection hall glowed with candlelight and polished stone. Tall windows reflected hundreds of faces. Council elders sat above the crowd with ink-stained ledgers. Alphas from every northern territory stood below the platform, broad-shouldered, well-dressed, certain they had the right to measure women like land. Grace kept her hands folded in front of her plain cream dress. Not trembling, not pleading, just folded. The dress was clean, but old. Too simple for a hall like this. Too soft around a body like hers. She was white, round-faced, a little chubby in the way court women had always pretended was unfortunate. Pretty enough to be noticed kindly in a village. Not sharp enough to be praised in a palace. Not the kind of woman alpha bloodlines fought over. She had known that before entering. Still, knowing did not stop humiliation from finding new places to cut. The announcer stood at the edge of the platform, holding the final parchment. His voice had been proud all evening when reading the names of daughters from noble houses. Marissa Vale had received 3 offers before her name was finished. Eleanor Shaw had been given a velvet cloak by Alpha Derek Hale himself. Even quiet Hannah Pierce, who had barely lifted her eyes, had been claimed by a border alpha with a gentle nod and a ring of dark bronze. Then there was Grace. No flowers, no cloak, no alpha stepping forward. Only her name hanging in the hall after everyone had decided not to touch it. The announcer cleared his throat. Grace Miller, he repeated. A second time. Because ceremony demanded mercy look official. No one moved. An alpha near the front shifted his weight and looked away as if her loneliness embarrassed him more than his rejection did. Someone behind him whispered something Grace could not hear. Then laughter followed. Small, controlled, crueler because it tried to sound polite. Grace lowered her eyes to the stone beneath her shoes. The floor had little veins of silver running through it, bright under candlelight. She focused on one thin line and followed it with her gaze until it disappeared beneath the steps. That was what she wanted to do. Disappear beneath something beautiful. The announcer's face tightened. Is there any alpha who wishes to place a claim? Silence. Not soft. Public. Grace felt every second of it touch her skin. An elder leaned toward another and murmured, "This is unfortunate. Unfortunate. Not wrong. Not cruel. Unfortunate." Grace breathed in slowly. She had promised herself she would not cry. Crying gave people proof they had mattered. The announcer lowered the parchment. No alpha has placed a claim on Grace Miller. There it was. Said clearly. Recorded cleanly. The only woman no alpha wanted. Grace nodded once, as if the announcement had merely confirmed the weather. Then she bent, placed the untouched white bouquet on the lowest stone step, and began to walk down from the platform before anyone could dismiss her. That was when the hall doors opened, and every alpha who had ignored her lowered his head. Grace Miller had learned early that taking up space invited punishment. Not always with hands. Not always with cruel words spoken directly to her face. Sometimes punishment came as a glance. A pause. A smile that arrived too late and stayed too long. She was 12 the first time a matron told her to stand behind the taller girls during a spring ceremony. "You are sweet, dear," the woman had said, adjusting Grace's sleeve without meeting her eyes. But some girls are meant to be seen first. Grace had understood what she meant. Some girls were meant to glow under candlelight. Some girls were meant to wear silk without apology. Some girls had sharp cheekbones, narrow waists, graceful necks, and family names that made alpha sons straighten when they entered a room. Grace had soft cheeks, a round face, a body that filled out dresses instead of floating inside them, warm brown eyes that made old women trust her with children and kitchen keys, not crowns. She was pretty in the way people called safe, pretty in the way no one fought over, pretty enough for kindness, not enough for desire. By 16, she had learned to laugh before others could pity her. By 18, she had learned to step aside when noble daughters walked past. By 24, she had learned the most useful lesson of all. Do not hope where powerful men can see it. Hope made rejection personal. Silence made it survivable. So Grace became quiet. Not empty. Quiet. She listened more than she spoke. She remembered who preferred honey and tea. She noticed when servants limped and when old widows lacked firewood. She learned which council wives smiled with teeth and which ones smiled with knives. People called her gentle because they did not know what restraint cost. People called her simple because she did not correct them. Being underestimated was safer than being examined. Being unnoticed was safer than being unwanted out loud. Until tonight. Tonight, the Great Selection Hall had taken every private insult and dressed it in ceremony. Grace had not wanted to attend. Her aunt had insisted. "You must at least be presented," Aunt Lydia said while pinning Grace's hair into soft chestnut coils. A woman cannot spend her life hiding in doorways. Grace had looked at herself in the mirror then. Cream dress, plain neckline, soft body, kind face. Nothing offensive, nothing unforgettable. "What if no one chooses me?" she had asked. Her aunt's hands paused only once, then continued pinning. "Then you walk home with your head high." It had sounded noble in a bedroom. It felt different beneath 100 alpha eyes. The platform had been colder than Grace expected. Every woman beside her smelled of expensive oils, ambition, and bloodlines carefully preserved through generations. Grace smelled faintly of lavender soap and rainwater from the walkover. One by one, they were chosen. One by one, white flowers disappeared from nervous hands. One by one, cloaks settled over shoulders that had already been measured worthy. Grace waited, not because she believed someone would step forward, because leaving before the end would look like fear. And Grace Miller had given the world many things. Her voice, her place, her expectations. She would not give it the satisfaction of seeing her run. The alphas did not look at Grace as men look at a woman. They looked at her as buyers look at an animal they have already decided not to purchase. Briefly, practically, without guilt. The first alpha who passed her was from the western coast, handsome in a polished way, with rings on 3 fingers and a smile that had probably ruined better women than Grace. He slowed in front of her for half a breath. His eyes moved from her face to her waist, then lower, then away. Not cruelly. That was the worst part. Cruelty would have given her something to resist. Disinterest gave her nothing to hold. He turned to the girl beside her instead. "Your family controls the eastern grain roads?" he asked. The girl curtsied. "Yes, Alpha." "Good." A white cloak settled over the girl's shoulders within minutes. Grace kept her eyes forward. The second Alpha smelled like pine smoke and expensive leather. He did not stop at all. His gaze brushed Grace's cream dress, her soft arms, the place where her bodice curved too warmly for current court fashion. Then he passed, as if she were furniture placed too close to the path. A council attendant scratched something into a ledger. Grace wondered if he wrote rejected, or simply skipped. The third Alpha was older, gray at the temples, a border ruler with scars near his jaw and a reputation for choosing practical women. For one foolish second, Grace thought he might pause. He did. His eyes settled on her face. "You are Miller's niece?" he asked. Grace dipped her chin. "Yes, Alpha." "Any dowry?" "No territory." "Bloodline strength?" "Ordinary." "Training?" "I keep household accounts. I can read treaty law and manage winter stores." He gave a faint sigh. Not unkind. "Tired." "That is useful," he said. "Useful." Grace felt the word land. Not beautiful. Not wanted. Useful. Then his gaze moved past her to a narrow blonde with a hunting family crest on her sleeve. Grace stood still while he chose someone else. The hall grew warmer as the evening dragged on. Candles melted lower. Perfume thickened. The flowers in Grace's hands began to lose shape beneath the pressure of her fingers. She loosened her grip carefully. No one noticed. Of course they did not. 2 young alphas came together, laughing under their breath as they walked down the line. One of them leaned toward the other when they reached Grace. "Pretty enough," he murmured. Grace heard him. She was meant to. But not queen material. The other snorted softly. Not even Luna material. Their laughter moved on before they did. Grace looked straight ahead. Not because the words did not hurt. Because they did. Because they found the oldest bruise inside her and pressed there with lazy fingers. Pretty enough. But not enough. That had been the shape of her whole life. Enough to be included when kindness was cheap. Not enough to be defended when choice mattered. Enough to serve tea. Not enough to sit at the table. Enough to be called sweet. Not enough to be desired. Her aunt sat somewhere in the crowd. Grace did not look for her. She could not bear to see pity on the only face that had tried to give her courage. A bell sounded from the elders' platform. Only 3 women remained unclaimed. Then 2. Then 1. Grace. The final alpha in the line approached with ceremony-heavy steps. Derek Hale. Young, powerful, praised too loudly by people who wanted his approval. Earlier that evening, she had seen him place a velvet cloak over Eleanor Shaw with a smile meant for the room, not the woman. Now he stopped in front of Grace. For the first time all night, an alpha looked at her long enough for the hall to notice. Hope stirred. Small. Unwanted. Embarrassing. Grace hated herself for it immediately. Derek's gaze moved over her with polished patience. Then he leaned close enough that only she and the nearest attendants could hear. "You seem kind," he said. Grace said nothing. His mouth curved. But kindness does not survive beside an alpha. The words were soft, almost apologetic. Then he straightened and walked away. No cloak. No flower taken. No claim. The silence after him was not empty. It was full of everyone pretending not to have watched. Grace lowered her eyes to the bouquet in her hands. The white petals had bruised beneath her fingers after all. The announcer looked more uncomfortable than Grace felt. That almost made it worse. His fingers tightened around the parchment as if the paper itself might rescue him from the silence. He glanced once toward the council elders above the hall. One elder gave the smallest nod. Proceed. Ceremony had rules. Even humiliation needed proper wording. Grace stood on the platform with the bruised bouquet in her hands and waited for the sentence everyone already knew to become official. The announcer cleared his throat. Grace Miller remains unclaimed. The words traveled cleanly through the hall. No one gasped. No one needed to. A few women lowered their eyes in sympathy. Several alphas shifted their attention elsewhere, already finished with the matter. To them, the moment was over. A failed candidate. An awkward pause. A name that would be crossed from the ledger before supper. But Grace remained standing inside it. That was the thing about public shame. For everyone else, it passed. For the person wearing it, time slowed down and became a room with no door. An elder leaned forward. No alpha has placed a claim on her. The announcer swallowed. No, elder. The elder's gaze moved over Grace. Not cruel. Not kind. Administrative. As recorded. A low voice came from the alpha section near the front. Let her go. A few heads turned. Grace did not. She knew the voice belonged to one of Derek Hale's companions. The same young alpha who had laughed earlier. He had a bright smile, polished boots, and the easy confidence of someone who had never wondered whether he would be wanted. He said it louder this time. Let her go. No alpha wants her. The hall changed. Not enough for anyone to call it outrage. Enough for the words to settle. No alpha wants her. Grace felt them enter the air around her like cold smoke. There were many ways to reject a woman. Silence was one. A turned shoulder was another. A missing cloak. An untouched flower. A name repeated twice with no answer. But this was different. This was not no alpha has chosen her. This was no alpha wants her. As if desire itself had voted. As if every powerful man in the room had reached the same conclusion and found her lacking not just for marriage, but for longing. Grace's fingers went still around the bouquet. She had thought the deepest cut would be standing alone. She was wrong. The deepest cut was realizing they believed she should be grateful for being dismissed quietly. A woman beside Marissa Vale whispered, "That was unnecessary." Marissa did not answer. She only looked at Grace with a soft, practiced pity that somehow felt worse than laughter. Grace lowered her gaze to the flowers. The white petals were no longer perfect. Some had bent at the edges. One stem had snapped beneath her thumb. They looked like they had survived being held too carefully for too long. That seemed fitting. The announcer stepped closer, voice gentle now. "Miss Miller, you may step down." "You may." How merciful. Grace looked up. For the first time all evening, she let herself see the whole hall. The alphas with their chosen women. The elders with their ledgers. The girls draped in cloaks that smelled of cedar, smoke, wealth, power. Her aunt in the third row, face pale, one hand pressed to her mouth. Grace's chest hurt then. Not for herself. For the woman who had pinned her hair and told her to walk home with her head high. So Grace did. She bent slowly and placed the bouquet on the lowest stone step. Not thrown. Not dropped. Placed. Carefully. Like something returned to a ceremony that had never belonged to her. Then she straightened. "No need," she said softly. The announcer blinked. "Miss Miller." Grace gathered the edge of her plain cream dress and stepped down before he could finish dismissing her. One step, then another. The hall watched. Of course it did. People always watched once the wound was already open. Grace did not look at Derek Hale. She did not look at Marissa. She did not look at the elders who would write her name into the evening as a small failure of selection. She walked toward the side aisle with her hands empty and her expression calm. No tears, no trembling breath, no plea for someone to reconsider. They had wanted her unwanted. Fine. She would leave before they could enjoy removing her. Her foot reached the final step. Then the great hall doors opened. A gust of cold night air swept across the candles. Every flame bent. Every whisper died. Grace stopped before she meant to. Not because she knew who had entered. Because every alpha in the hall lowered his head at once. Alpha King Rowan Blackwell did not need to announce himself. The room did it for him. One moment. The selection hall was full of whispers, pity, silk, candlelight, and the quiet satisfaction of people who believed they had just agreed on a woman's worth. The next, every sound disappeared. Not faded. Disappeared. Grace stood at the bottom of the platform stairs with empty hands and a heart that had already prepared itself to leave. The cold air from the open doors brushed against her face, lifting a loose strand of chestnut hair from her cheek. She did not turn at first. She only watched the reaction. Alphas lowered their heads. Not politely. Instinctively. Men who had spent the entire evening measuring women like property now stood very still, shoulders tense, eyes down, as if the ground had become safer than looking forward. The council elders rose from their seats. Too quickly. Derek Hale, who had just walked away from her with soft rejection in his mouth, dropped his gaze as if he had never dared speak cruelly in his life. Grace understood then. Only one man could make alphas look smaller without saying a word. The king. Rowan Blackwell entered the hall in a long black coat fastened with silver at the throat. He was tall in a way that made distance seem dishonest, as though the room bent around him before he crossed it. Dark hair, pale face, cold eyes. Not beautiful in the gentle way poets liked. Worse, commanding. His presence did not ask to be noticed. It removed the possibility of ignoring him. 2 royal guards followed several steps behind him, but they felt unnecessary. No one in the hall would have moved against him. No one would have breathed too loudly if he disliked the sound. Grace took one small step toward the side aisle. Quietly. Habit made the decision before pride could stop it. Powerful men entering rooms had never meant safety for women like her. It meant attention shifted. It meant people looked for someone weaker to adjust around him. She had been that adjustment too many times. So she moved aside. Or tried to. Rowan's gaze swept the hall once. Slow. Unhurried. It passed over the elders. The claimed women in their fresh cloaks. Marissa Vale in silver blue silk, standing like a painting meant to be admired. Derek Hale near the front. The alphas with their bowed heads. Then his gaze stopped. On Grace. Not near her. Not past her. On her. Grace went still. Her first thought was that she had done something wrong. Her second was worse. He sees me. The words moved through her like warning. No alpha had looked at her that way all night. Not with appraisal. Not with dismissal. Not with that quick, practical weighing of body, bloodline, dowry, usefulness. Rowan Blackwell looked at her as if the entire hall had gone quiet for a reason only he had just understood. Grace lowered her eyes. Not from obedience. From survival. But the silence changed again. Deepened. As if even the candles were waiting. Bootsteps crossed the stone floor. Measured. Closer. Grace felt each one without looking up. No one spoke. No elder explained. No announcer dared fill the space with ceremony. The king did not ask whose name had been called or why a woman stood alone at the steps with no cloak, no flower, no alpha beside her. He already knew enough. Or perhaps he knew nothing. Perhaps he simply saw what no one else had cared to see. Rowan stopped in front of her. The edge of his black coat entered her lowered vision. Rain clung to the leather of his boots. The air around him carried winter, smoke, and something older than rank. Look at me, he said. His voice was quiet. Not gentle. Not cruel. A command shaped carefully enough not to bruise. Grace lifted her head. Their eyes met. Something moved beneath her skin. Not fear. Not exactly. A sudden heat sparked at the inside of her wrist, so sharp she nearly curled her hand against her dress. She forced herself not to react. Rowan saw anyway. His gaze flickered once to her sleeve, then back to her face. For the first time since entering the hall, the Alpha King's expression changed. Only slightly. But Grace saw it. Recognition. Not of her name. Of something hidden. Something waking. Behind him, An elder found his voice. Your Majesty, the selection has nearly concluded. Miss Miller was just. Rowan did not look away from Grace. Unclaimed, he said. The elder swallowed. Yes. A faint murmur moved through the room. Grace wished the floor would open. Rowan's eyes sharpened. Bye, everyone. No one answered. That answer was enough. Grace expected him to step back then, to understand the mistake, to realize she was not some overlooked treasure wrapped in mystery, but simply Grace Miller in an old cream dress, soft-bodied, empty-handed, unwanted in front of witnesses. Instead, the king turned slightly. His gaze moved across the alphas who had passed her by, then returned to her. And in a hall full of men who had refused to choose her, Rowan Blackwell looked at Grace as if they had all failed a test he had not announced. Rowan Blackwell did not ask why Grace had been left unclaimed. He asked the question no one in the hall expected. Who told you that you were unwanted? The words were not loud. They did not need to be. They traveled through the selection hall with the quiet force of a blade laid flat against skin. Every alpha heard them. Every elder heard them. Every woman holding a white flower heard them. Grace heard them last. Or maybe she understood them last. For one strange second, she only stared at him. The king stood close enough that she could see rain caught in the dark fabric of his coat. Close enough to notice the faint scar near his jaw. Close enough to feel the heat still pulsing beneath her sleeve, right where her wrist had begun to burn the moment his eyes found her. She should have answered carefully. A woman like Grace did not speak honestly to a man like Rowan Blackwell in front of a room full of witnesses. Honesty was dangerous, especially when it had been locked inside for years. But something about his question made carefulness feel useless. Who told you that you were unwanted? Grace almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was too large a question for one answer. Her childhood matron had told her with a smile. The noble girls had told her by leaving no space beside them at tables. The alpha sons had told her when their eyes slid past her body toward thinner waists and brighter family crests. The council had told her with ledgers. The ceremony had told her with silence. Derek Hale had told her gently. The young alpha near the front had said it clearly enough for the room to keep. No alpha wants her. Grace looked past Rowan for a moment. At the elders. At the alphas. At the claimed women wrapped in fresh cloaks. At Marissa Vale, whose perfect mouth was no longer curved with pity. Then Grace looked back at the king. Everyone, she said. One word. Soft. Plain. Enough. The hall went still in a different way. Before, the silence had belonged to Rowan. Now it belonged to Grace. She felt it settle around her shoulders where no cloak had been placed. Heavy. Exposing. Almost warm. Rowan's expression did not change quickly. That made it worse for the men watching him. His face remained controlled, pale, cold. Only his eyes moved. Slowly, he turned from Grace and looked at the alphas who had passed her by. No one lifted his head. Not Derek. Not the older border ruler. Not the young man who had laughed. Rowan let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable enough to punish. Then he said, then everyone was wrong. A breath moved through the room. Not relief. Shock. Grace felt the words hit her before she believed them. Wrong. Not polite. Not mistaken in a small social way. Wrong. The king had not said she was acceptable. He had not said someone should have taken pity. He had not said there might still be use in her. He had looked at the judgment of every alpha in the hall and dismissed it. Grace's throat tightened. She hated that. She hated that one sentence from him could reach places years of self-control had carefully sealed. Derek Hale finally lifted his eyes. Your Majesty, no insult was intended. Rowan looked at him. The young alpha's face lost color. Insult often survives intention, Rowan said. Derek bowed his head again. Grace should have felt satisfied. She did not. Satisfaction required wanting them to regret it. Grace only wanted to leave before this strange new attention became another kind of cage. She took one careful step back. Rowan noticed immediately. Of course he did. His gaze returned to her, and the pressure in the room shifted with it. I will not keep you here, he said. Grace blinked. She had not expected that. Kings kept things. Territory. Silence. Promises. People. Rowan lowered his voice, though everyone still heard. But I will not let this room decide your worth because it lacked the sense to recognize it. The heat at Grace's wrist flared again. Sharper this time. She drew her hand against her skirt. Too late. Rowan's eyes dropped to the movement. So did one elder's. The old man's brows pulled together. Grace saw it. Fear moved through her then, not because Rowan had looked at her, because now someone else had seen him look. And attention, Grace knew, was never harmless for long. The elder saw the light before Grace could hide it. Not fully, not clearly, only a thin silver warmth beneath the edge of her sleeve, flashing once against her skin like moonlight trapped under glass. But old men who spent their lives reading bloodlines did not need much. Council Elder Warren Vale rose slowly from his seat. Too slowly. That was how Grace knew it mattered. No one moved quickly when they wanted to avoid frightening a secret into running. "Miss Miller," he said. Grace's fingers curled into her skirt. The heat at her wrist pulsed again, sharper now, as if something beneath her skin had heard its name called from far away. Rowan's gaze moved to the elder. The room cooled. "Sit down," the king said. Elder Vale stopped. For one suspended second, every candle in the hall seemed to burn without flickering. Then the elder lowered himself back into his chair. But his eyes did not leave Grace's sleeve. Neither did Derek Hale's. Neither did Marissa Vale's. That was the moment Grace understood the danger had changed shape. A few minutes ago, she had been unwanted. Now she was noticed. She was not sure which was worse. Rowan stepped slightly to the side, blocking part of her from the elder platform without making the movement look protective. That was almost more unsettling than if he had declared it openly. He knew how to shield someone without touching them. Grace did not know what to do with that. "Your Majesty," Elder Vale said carefully. "There may be a matter requiring verification." "No," Rowan said. One word. No explanation. The elder's mouth tightened. "If Miss Miller bears a mark, she bears a wrist," Rowan interrupted coldly. "And it is not council property." A murmur moved through the hall. Grace felt it brush her skin. Property. That was what every ceremony like this had tried to make of women. A flower held until taken. A cloak placed when approved. A name recorded when useful. A body evaluated for heirs, alliances, and softness that could be managed. Rowan had named the thing without dressing it politely. That frightened the council more than anger would have. Grace pulled her sleeve lower. The fabric did not help. The mark burned through it. Not painfully. Insistently. As if the nearness of Rowan Blackwell had woken something that had slept through years of being overlooked. She looked down despite herself. A faint crescent of silver light glowed beneath the cloth at the inside of her wrist. Small. Alive. Impossible. Grace's breath caught. She had seen that shape once before. When she was 9, fevered and half-conscious, her mother had wrapped her wrist in linen and whispered, "Never let them see it until the right man does." Grace had thought it was a dream. Her mother had died before explaining. The linen had stayed. Then sleeves. Then habit. Then forgetting. Until now. Until him. Rowan saw the recognition pass across her face. His expression changed again. Not triumph. Not possession. Concern. "Grace," he said quietly. Her name sounded different from him. Not announced. Not measured. Asked. She looked up too quickly. "I do not know what it is." The sentence came out smaller than she wanted. A woman in the hall whispered, "Sacred mark." Another voice answered, "Impossible." Elder Vale stood again before remembering he had been ordered not to. This time, he gripped the armrest and spoke from his chair. "Your Majesty, if that is what it appears to be, she cannot simply leave. The royal line must be informed. The mark must be examined." Grace's stomach went cold. Examined. There it was. The word that turned fear into a room with locked doors. She stepped back. Rowan did not reach for her. That mattered. He only turned his head slightly, enough to keep her in his sight, enough to let the hall understand he noticed every inch of distance she needed. "No one will examine her," he said. Derek Hale laughed once. Nervous. Unwise. "Your Majesty, with respect, if she truly carried a sacred mark, surely one of us would have sensed it." Rowan looked at him. Derek's laughter died. "Exactly," Rowan said. Silence fell. Heavy. Immediate. Because the insult was no longer aimed at Grace. It had turned. Every alpha in the room had walked past a woman with something ancient burning beneath her skin and called her lacking. Every alpha had weighed her body, her dowry, her softness, her ordinary name, and failed to notice what their wolves should have known. Grace pressed her glowing wrist against her stomach. Not to hide it now. To steady herself. Rowan looked at her hand, then her face. "I will ask only once," he said. The hall seemed to hold its breath. Grace did too. He did not say, "Come here." He did not say, "You are mine." He did not say, "I claim you." He lowered his voice, and somehow that made the words reach farther. "Do you want to leave this room?" Grace stared at him. No one had asked her that all night. Not the announcer. Not the elders. Not the alphas. Not even Pity had asked what she wanted. Her wrist burned brighter beneath her sleeve. Grace swallowed. "Yes," she said. Rowan inclined his head, not as a king granting permission, as a man accepting an answer. "Then we leave." Rowan Blackwell did not touch Grace when he led her from the selection hall. That was what everyone noticed. Not first. First, they noticed the king turning his back on the council. Then the alphas stepping out of his path without needing to be ordered. Then Grace Miller, the woman no alpha had wanted, walking beside him with one hand pressed over the glowing mark beneath her sleeve. But after the shock settled, after the silence found shape, they noticed the space between them. He did not grip her wrist, did not place a cloak over her shoulders, did not claim her before witnesses to prove the room had been wrong. He simply walked slowly enough for her to keep pace. That almost broke her more than being chosen would have. Grace had spent her life adjusting to other people's speed, walking faster when she delayed someone important, slowing down when noble women wanted to enter first, stepping aside when men with titles crossed narrow corridors. No one powerful had ever matched her pace before. The hall doors stood open ahead, spilling cold night air across the stone floor. Grace could see darkness beyond them, rain glittering in the courtyard, carriages waiting, torches bending in the wind. Freedom looked cold, but it looked real. Behind her, Elder Vale's voice cut through the quiet. "Your Majesty, you cannot remove a marked woman from council examination." Rowan stopped. Grace stopped too. The entire hall seemed to inhale. Slowly, Rowan turned back. Not fully, just enough. "That sentence," he said, "is exactly why she is leaving." The elder paled. "She may be tied to the royal bloodline. She is tied to herself first." No one spoke. Grace felt the words settle inside her, unfamiliar and heavy. Herself first. Not bloodline. Not duty. Not use. Not future heirs. Herself. Derek Hale stepped forward before wisdom could stop him. "Your Majesty, none of us meant to insult her." "If we had known." Rowan looked at him. Derek fell silent. "If you had known she was powerful," Rowan said, "you would have wanted her." Derek's jaw tightened. "That is not the same thing as valuing her." Grace's throat closed. Because that was it. That was the wound beneath all the others. They would not regret rejecting Grace. They would regret misjudging what she might be worth. Rowan understood the difference. The sacred mark warmed beneath her palm, pulsing once, like an answer. The council elder tried again, more carefully. "Then what do you intend, Your Majesty?" Grace felt the room lean toward the question. There it was. The expectation. The old shape of the story. A king finds a hidden mark. A king claims. A king takes. A king corrects one public humiliation with another public possession and calls it protection. Grace's body went still. She had been unwanted one moment ago. She refused to become owned in the next. Rowan turned toward her. Not the council. Her. His eyes were cold to the room, but when they settled on Grace, something in them changed. Not softness exactly. Restraint. A kind of carefulness that looked almost painful on a man built from command. "What I intend," he said, "does not matter until she decides what she wants." The hall went utterly silent. Grace stared at him. No one had prepared her for that. She knew how to endure insult. She knew how to survive pity. She knew how to lower her eyes until cruelty passed over her like weather. But choice. Choice required a part of her she had not used in years. Rowan stepped back from her. Then, before the council, before the alphas, before every woman still holding flowers, the Alpha King lowered himself onto one knee. A sound moved through the hall. Shock. Disbelief. Fear. Grace forgot how to breathe. Kings did not kneel. Not to unclaimed women. Not to miller girls in old cream dresses. Not to soft-bodied daughters with ordinary names and glowing secrets under their sleeves. Rowan did. His black coat touched the stone where her discarded bouquet still rested on the lowest step. He did not pick it up. He did not offer it back like ceremony could be repaired. He only looked up at her. "I will not take what they failed to value," he said. "I will ask." Grace's eyes burned. She hated that too. Not because she was ashamed. Because tenderness, when given without demand, had nowhere safe to land. Behind Rowan, every alpha who had passed her by stood frozen. Grace looked at them. then at the elders, then at Marissa Vale, whose pity had vanished completely. Finally, Grace looked down at the man on one knee before her, the most powerful alpha in the kingdom. Waiting, not claiming, waiting. Her hand slowly moved away from her wrist. The silver crescent shone through the sleeve now, bright enough to paint light across her fingers. Rowan saw it. His expression did not turn hungry. It turned reverent. That was when Grace understood the true danger. Not that he saw the mark, that he saw her. She took one breath, then another. And for the first time that night, Grace Miller did not ask herself whether anyone wanted her. She asked whether she wanted to stay. Her answer was quiet. No. Rowan bowed his head once. Accepting. Grace stepped past him toward the open doors. This time, she did not walk away because no one chose her. She walked away because someone finally asked. Outside the selection hall, the night did not feel like freedom at first. It felt like exposure. Rain fell across the palace courtyard in thin silver lines, soft enough not to hide anything, cold enough to make Grace aware of every place her dress clung to her skin. Torches burned along the stone path. Carriages waited beneath dark arches. Servants stood frozen near the steps, pretending not to stare and failing completely. Grace stopped beneath the doorway. Behind her, the hall remained silent. In front of her, the courtyard opened wide. Too wide. For most of her life, she had survived by knowing where edges were. Doorways, corners, back rows, servants' passages, places where she could become smaller without anyone asking why. Now there were no edges. Only open stone, open rain, open attention. Rowan Blackwell stepped out behind her, but did not come too close. She noticed that before she noticed anything else. He left space between them as if distance were the first courtesy no one had ever taught her to expect. One of his guards moved forward with a black cloak. Rowan lifted one hand. The guard stopped immediately. Grace looked at him. Rowan's eyes stayed on her face. "You are cold." It was not a question. Grace almost said she was fine. The lie rose by habit, then died there. "I am," she said. The guard held the cloak out again, more carefully this time, toward Grace instead of Rowan. That mattered too. No one placed it on her shoulders. No one fastened it at her throat. No one turned protection into possession. Grace took the cloak herself. The fabric was heavy, warm, dark as midnight. It smelled faintly of smoke and winter rain. She wrapped it around her shoulders with fingers that had finally started to tremble. Rowan saw the tremor. He said nothing. Bless him for that. Or curse him. She had not decided which would be safer. Behind them, footsteps sounded inside the hall. Grace stiffened. Rowan turned his head slightly. Not much. Enough to make the doorway go still again. Aunt Lydia appeared first, pale and breathless, her shawl clutched around her chest. Her eyes found Grace, then the cloak, then the king standing several feet away. For one terrible second, Grace thought she would see fear. Instead, she saw grief. "Oh, Grace," her aunt whispered. That nearly broke her. Not the alphas. Not the announcement. Not no alpha wants her. That single soft voice, carrying all the sorrow of someone who had hoped the world might be kinder this time. Grace stepped toward her. Aunt Lydia reached for her hands, then stopped when she saw the light beneath Grace's sleeve. The silver crescent had not faded. It had grown brighter in the rain. Grace pulled the cloak edge over her wrist. Too late. Her aunt's face changed. Not with surprise. With memory. Grace went still. "You knew," she said. Aunt Lydia closed her eyes. The rain filled the silence between them. "Not enough," Lydia whispered. Grace's stomach tightened. "That is not an answer." "No," her aunt said. "It is not." Rowan did not interrupt. That made Grace hate him a little less. A council elder's voice called from inside the hall, sharp with controlled panic. "Miss Miller cannot leave the palace grounds until the mark is verified." Grace's fingers closed around the cloak. There it was again. Cannot. Verified. The language of men who found value only after naming ownership. Rowan stepped forward then. Only one step. Not between Grace and her aunt. Between Grace and the hall. "She can leave wherever she wishes," he said. The elder did not appear in the doorway. "Wise. Your Majesty, if her mark is sacred, she may be bound to royal succession." Rowan's voice lowered. "She is bound to nothing tonight except her own answer." Grace looked at his back. Broad. Still. Unshaken. She had seen men stand in front of women before. Usually to hide them. To silence them. To make themselves look noble in the shape of rescue. Rowan did not look rescued by protecting her. He looked angry that protection had become necessary. Aunt Lydia squeezed Grace's fingers. "Come home," she whispered. Home. A small house behind the mill road. A blue kettle. A narrow bed. A mirror where Grace had once asked, "What if no one chooses me?" Grace looked past the courtyard gates, then back toward the hall. For the first time, leaving did not feel like being discarded. It felt like refusal. She turned to Rowan. "I am going home." He inclined his head. "Then I will make sure the road stays clear." Grace studied him. "You will not come inside." "No." "You will not send anyone after me." "No." "You will not ask about the mark tonight." His gaze dropped once to her hidden wrist, then returned to her face. No, the answers were too simple. Too easy. Grace did not trust easy things, but she trusted the way he did not reach for her when she stepped away. That was enough for one night. She walked down the wet palace steps beside Aunt Lydia, wrapped in the king's cloak, but not owned by it. Behind her, Rowan remained in the rain. Behind him, the selection hall waited with its flowers, ledgers, claims, and shame. Grace did not look back. Not once. And for the first time in her life, every powerful man in the palace watched her leave because she had chosen to. Grace did not sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed while Aunt Lydia moved quietly through the small house, closing shutters, adding wood to the stove, pretending ordinary tasks could make the world ordinary again. They could not. The king's black cloak hung over the back of a chair. It looked wrong there. Too dark for the little room. Too heavy beside the blue kettle, the patched curtains, the basket of mending Grace had left unfinished before the selection ceremony. It carried the smell of rain and smoke and Rowan Blackwell's quiet restraint. Grace tried not to look at it. She failed. Her wrists still glowed beneath the linen wrap Aunt Lydia had tied around it. Not brightly now. Not enough to light the room, but enough that Grace could feel it, warm under the cloth, pulsing in slow rhythm with something she did not understand. Something that had woken when the king looked at her. Grace hated that thought, not because it was impossible, because part of her wanted it to mean something. Wanting was dangerous. Tonight had proved that. "You should drink this," Aunt Lydia said. Grace looked up. Her aunt held out a cup of honey tea with both hands. The same tea she had made when Grace was a child with fever. The same tea she had made when Grace came home from village dances too quiet. The same tea she made whenever words were too sharp to touch directly. Grace accepted it. The cup warmed her palms. Neither woman spoke for a long moment. Outside, rain tapped against the roof. Somewhere down the road, a horse snorted. Grace imagined royal guards stationed beyond the mill path, keeping councilmen away because a king had said she was allowed to leave. Allowed? No, not allowed. Asked. There was a difference. Grace was still trying to understand the shape of it. "You knew about the mark," she said. Aunt Lydia closed her eyes. The silence answered before she did. "Yes." Grace's fingers tightened around the cup. "How long?" "Since your mother brought you here." Grace went still. "My mother died here." "No," Lydia whispered. "Your mother hid here." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Grace set the tea down before it could spill. Aunt Lydia sat across from her, looking suddenly older than she had that morning. Smaller, as if every secret had weight, and tonight the last of her strength had been spent carrying it. "She came in the middle of winter," Lydia said. "You were 3. Feverish. Crying. Your wrist was glowing so brightly I could see it through the blanket." Grace looked down at the linen wrap. The skin beneath it burned once. What was she running from? The council. Grace almost laughed. Of course. Not rogues. Not monsters. Not war. Men with ledgers. Men who called girls bloodline matters and women vessels for succession. Aunt Lydia's voice broke softly. "Your mother made me promise that if the mark faded, I would let you live ordinary. No court. No testing. No sacred halls. No men arguing over what your body might mean for a throne." Grace swallowed. "And if it came back?" Lydia looked at the king's cloak on the chair. Then the right man had seen it. Grace stood. Too quickly. The chair scraped against the floor. No, Lydia did not move. Grace's voice stayed low, but something inside it shook. "No. Do not turn this into fate. Do not make him the answer because he looked at me once without cruelty. He did more than look. That is not enough." "I know." "No, you do not." Grace pressed one hand against her chest. "You did not stand in that hall. You did not hear them say no alpha wants her. You did not feel every person decide I was nothing. and then suddenly stare because I might be something useful after all. Aunt Lydia flinched. Grace hated herself for hurting her. She did not take it back. The king is different, Lydia said carefully. Maybe. The word was not forgiveness. Not trust. Only honesty. Maybe he is different from them. But different does not mean safe. The room went quiet. Then a knock sounded at the door. Both women froze. Not loud. Not demanding. 3 slow taps. Grace's pulse sharpened. Aunt Lydia rose halfway. Grace lifted one hand. No. She crossed the room herself. Not because she was brave. Because she was tired of other people standing between her and answers. She opened the door only as far as the chain allowed. Rowan Blackwell stood outside in the rain. No guards beside him. No crown. No command in his posture. Only the same dark coat, now soaked through, and eyes that found her face before they found the wrapped mark at her wrist. Good. You said you would not come inside, Grace said. I won't. You said you would not ask about the mark tonight. I won't. Then why are you here? Rowan looked past her for half a breath, not into the house, but toward the road behind him. Because the council has already sent riders to the capital, he said. By sunrise, they will try to turn your name into law. Grace's hand tightened around the door. Rowan's voice lowered. I came to tell you before anyone else decided your future in a room you were not standing in. Grace did not open the door wider. Not at first. The chain remained between them. Thin brass against old wood. Useless against a king, and somehow the only thing in the world that made sense. Rowan Blackwell stood outside in the rain, telling her the council had already begun moving pieces around her name. Not her body. Not her choice. Her name. As if Grace Miller had become a document before she had even understood the mark burning beneath her own skin. Aunt Lydia stepped closer behind her. Riders. Rowan's gaze did not leave Grace. 3. Sent through the North Road less than an hour ago. To do what? Grace asked. To summon the royal bloodline court. The words entered the little house like cold smoke. Aunt Lydia inhaled sharply. Grace heard it. She did not look back. What is that? Rowan's jaw tightened once. A court older than the current council. It exists for succession disputes, sacred marks, royal mate bonds, disputed heirs, and any bloodline matter they believe can affect the throne. They believe, Grace repeated. Yes. And what do you believe? That question stopped him. Good. Grace wanted him stopped. She wanted every powerful person in her life to pause before speaking about her, as if certainty were a right. Rain slid down the side of Rowan's face. He did not wipe it away. I believe they will try to take your ordinary life away from you and call it duty. The answer was too clean, too close to the fear already sitting in her chest. Grace's fingers tightened on the door edge. And you? His eyes held hers. I believe I do not get to decide what your life becomes because my wolf recognized what theirs failed to see. Silence. Not empty. Careful. Grace hated that carefulness could feel like respect when given by someone powerful enough not to need it. Behind her, Aunt Lydia whispered, Grace. But Grace had already understood. The selection hall had not ended. It had followed her home. The flowers, the ledgers, the claims, the pity, the sudden interest, the old men saying cannot and must and verified. All of it had only changed rooms. What happens at sunrise? Grace asked. Rowan's expression darkened. They will request authority to escort you to the capital. Request. His mouth tightened. Formally. Grace almost smiled. There it was again. Mercy dressed as procedure. They mean take. Yes. Aunt Lydia moved beside Grace now, face pale. They cannot. Rowan looked at her, then back to Grace. They can try. The mark under Grace's linen wrap pulsed once, bright enough that silver light touched the chain across the door. All 3 of them looked at it. Grace pulled her wrist back against her chest. Not in shame. In anger. For years, her body had been too soft, too ordinary, too forgettable for them. Now one hidden light under her skin had made it a kingdom matter. No, she said. Rowan went still. Aunt Lydia's eyes filled. Grace opened the door. Only then. Not because she trusted him fully. Because she refused to hide behind a chain while men on horseback carried her future toward a court that had never asked whether she wanted one. Rowan stepped back immediately, giving her space. That mattered. Again. Grace hated that it mattered. She stood in the doorway wrapped in his black cloak, linen tied around her glowing wrist, rain dampening the hem of her old cream dress. She did not look like a queen. She did not want to. What do I need to do? She asked. Rowan's answer came slowly. You come to the palace before they drag you there. Aunt Lydia made a wounded sound. Grace did not move. Rowan continued. You enter the council chamber standing. Not escorted. Not summoned. Not examined. You speak before they write you into law. And you? I stand where you tell me to stand. The words struck harder than they should have. Grace searched his face for performance. For possession hidden beneath patience. For the moment when the king would become like every alpha in that hall and mistake protection for permission. She did not find it. Not yet. So she gave him one condition. If I go as Grace Miller. Yes. Not your mate. Yes. Not sacred property. His voice lowered. Never. Not a future queen. Rowan hesitated. A small hesitation. Honest enough to hurt. Then he said, not unless you choose it. Grace looked at him for a long time. The rain fell between them like the last soft thing left in the world. Then she turned to Aunt Lydia. Her aunt was crying now, silently, one hand pressed to her mouth. Grace took that hand and held it. I spent my whole life trying not to be seen, she said quietly. They saw me anyway. So this time, I will make them hear me too. Aunt Lydia nodded through tears. Rowan bowed his head once. Not deeply. Enough. Grace stepped out into the rain. Behind her, the little house waited with its blue kettle, patched curtains, and unfinished mending. In front of her, the road to the palace gleamed black beneath the storm. For the first time, Grace did not walk toward judgment. She walked toward the room that thought it could name her. And this time, she was bringing her own voice. The council chamber had not changed since Grace left it unwanted. That was the first thing she noticed. Same polished stone. Same high windows. Same elder seats raised above the floor, as if height could turn opinion into law. Same scent of candle smoke, ink, old power, and men who believed naming a thing gave them ownership over it. But Grace had changed. Not loudly. Not beautifully. Simply enough. She entered through the main doors wearing the same cream dress from the selection hall, the same black cloak around her shoulders, and the same linen wrap around her wrist. Rain darkened the hem of her skirt. Her hair had loosened from its pins. Her cheeks were pale from the cold. She did not look perfect. She looked present. That frightened them more. Every elder turned when she walked in. Several alphas stood near the side walls, summoned too quickly, dressed too carefully for men who had not expected the woman they dismissed to return before they finished deciding what she was worth. Derek Hale was there. So was Marissa Vale. So was Elder Warren Vale, with a stack of documents already open before him. Of course, they had started writing before she arrived. Grace stopped in the center of the chamber. Rowan Blackwell entered behind her. Not beside her. Not ahead of her. Behind. The room noticed. Grace noticed more. Elder Vale rose slowly. Miss Miller, this matter is no longer personal. If your mark is sacred, the kingdom must verify its nature. Grace looked at the documents on his table. My name is already written there. The elder paused. For record? No, Grace said. For control. Silence. Derek shifted near the wall. Grace turned toward him first. Not because he mattered most. Because the wound had begun with men like him pretending rejection was kindness. You said kindness does not survive beside an alpha. Derek's face tightened. I meant no cruelty. I know. Grace's voice remained calm. That was the problem. You did not need cruelty to dismiss me. Habit was enough. His eyes dropped. Grace turned back to the elders. You all looked at me last night and saw nothing worth choosing. Then my wrist glowed, and suddenly I became a bloodline issue. A succession matter. A woman who cannot leave palace grounds. Her hand moved to the linen wrap. No one breathed. Slowly, Grace untied it. The silver crescent mark shone beneath the chamber light. Not wild. Not begging to be believed. Just there. A truth no ledger had created. Elder Vale leaned forward. Sacred Luna mark. The words moved through the room like hunger. Rowan stepped once. Grace lifted a hand without looking at him. He stopped. The council saw that too. Good. Grace faced Elder Vale. Do not call me Luna because the mark is useful to you. His mouth tightened. The mark carries obligations. So do apologies, Grace said. The room went still. She looked around slowly. At the alphas who had passed her. At the women who had pitted her. At the elders who had reduced her to a category the moment power appeared under her skin. You wanted me gone when I was only Grace Miller. Now you want me kept because I may be sacred. Both choices came from the same place. Her voice lowered. You never asked what I wanted. No one answered. Because no one had. Grace turned then. To Rowan. He stood near the doorway, rein still on his coat, eyes fixed on her, as if he would rather face a battlefield than interrupt one word she chose to speak. What do you want from me? She asked. The chamber held its breath. Rowan did not look at the mark. He looked at her face. Nothing you do not give freely. Elder Vale exhaled sharply. Your Majesty, the royal line, kneel, Rowan said. The word cracked through the chamber. Every alpha went still. Elder Vale paled. Your Majesty? Rowan's expression did not change. Kneel before the woman you tried to turn into law before asking her a single question. One by one, the elders lowered themselves to the stone. Not for the mark. Not for the bloodline. For Grace. Her throat tightened. She hated that it mattered. She loved that it was not enough. Grace looked down at them, then at the glowing crescent on her wrist, then at the open doors behind Rowan. For the first time in her life, every powerful person in the room was waiting for her answer. Not choosing for her. Waiting. Grace wrapped the linen back around her wrist. I will not be examined tonight, she said. No one moved. I will not be claimed tonight. Rowan bowed his head once. I will not become queen because frightened men discovered they were blind. A few elders flinched. Good. Grace lifted her chin. I will go home. I will learn what this mark means from people I choose. I will return when I decide to return. And if the kingdom wants my loyalty, it can begin by respecting my no. The silence that followed was different from every silence before it. Not pity. Not rejection. Recognition. Grace turned toward the doors. Rowan stepped aside before she reached him. Not much. Enough. As she passed, he spoke softly. May I walk you home? Grace stopped. She looked at him for a long moment. The king waited. No claim. No command. Only a question. At last, Grace said, You may walk behind me. Something almost like a smile touched his mouth. Almost. As you wish. Grace walked out of the council chamber with her head high, the sacred mark hidden again, and the whole kingdom finally understanding what every alpha had failed to see. She had never been unwanted. She had only been unseen. And now that she had been seen, she still belonged first to herself.